Fat girl sold to pay. Father's debt. Mountain man bought her freedom, won her heart. $500 or his life. The loan shark snarled, palm slamming the scarred oak table. Choose. Silas Hargrove's eyes skittered like trapped beetles, searching for mercy in a room that had none. Tankards froze halfway to mouths. Cards stopped mid-deal. In the shadowed corner, Cordelia Cora Hargrove flinched. 31, soft-bodied and steady-souled, she had come only to walk her father home. She did not expect to become his currency. "I can pay," Silas lied, voice wobbling. Then his finger lifted, crooked and cruel, pointing toward the corner. "Take her." The room inhaled at once. Chairs scraped, faces turned, hungry, pitying, a few delightedly vicious. Shame burned Cora's cheeks as two enforcers shouldered through the smoke, boots thudding, laughter sour. One yanked her to her feet, the other inspected her like livestock. "Big," he said. "She'll work. Maybe fetch a price out by the mines." Cora tried to pull free. "Papa, please," she whispered. Silas didn't look at her. 500, he insisted. "She's strong, eats little." Another lie. A bottle clinked down. The barkeep glanced away. Even those who pitied her said nothing. The window had been lean, and fear speaks louder than kindness when bellies are empty. The head collector grinned, showing a gold tooth. "Debt paid in flesh," he declared, "binding and final." He caught Cora's wrist and twisted until pain flashed white at the edges of her sight. Laughter rolled through the room like a cheap tune. Outside, snow powdered the boardwalk. Inside, heat pressed heavy and sour. Cora's heart hammered against its cage. She had always believed some quiet goodness lived inside people if you looked hard enough. Tonight, the good hid its face. "Stop." The word arrived low and iron, as if the mountains themselves had spoken. The tavern door swung wide. A gust of cold put out 2 lanterns and shivered the smoke. A man filled the frame, broad through the shoulders, height stealing the breath from the room. Gabriel Ironwood's coat was wolf-gray and travel-scarred. Snow salted his hair and the beard that cut a fierce line along his jaw. His eyes, dark, steady, utterly unimpressed, took the measure of every man between him and the girl with the bruising wrist. "Who are you to interrupt business?" the gold tooth snapped. Gabe stepped inside, dropped a heavy leather purse on the table. Coins thudded like small verdicts. "I'm the end of this business," he said. 500. The debt is settled. The girl walks out free. Silas sagged with sudden, greedy relief. The collectors counted quickly, then smirked. "Fine," the headman said, eyes glinting. "But if you pay, she's yours." Gabe didn't blink. "She belongs to herself." He turned to Cora, gentled his voice. "You're leaving? Now." Outside the saloon, the night bit hard. The wind carried the sting of iron and pine, the kind of cold that carved honesty into bones. Cora stood trembling beneath the flickering lamplight, the echo of that cruel laughter still clinging to her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, staring down at the snow where her tears melted into nothing. Gabe stepped out behind her, silent as a shadow, his heavy boots crunching softly. He didn't touch her, didn't speak right away, just watched her shoulders shake under the weight of betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, quiet, and steady as the ground. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you any more." Cora turned, eyes wide and wet. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." "I didn't need to," he said simply. "I saw enough." The lamplight caught his face then. the fine lines carved deep around his mouth, the silver glint in his dark hair, and those eyes, eyes that had seen too much loss to look away from someone else's suffering. She searched them, half afraid of what she'd find, but there was no pity there, only conviction, only kindness wrapped in quiet power. "I have nowhere to go," she said finally, voice breaking. "He's all I had left. And now?" Gabe nodded once, slow and certain, as though he'd already known. "There's a place in the mountains, my home. You can come if you choose. It's not fancy and it's not close to anything, but you'll have a roof and food. No one there to sell or buy you." Cora swallowed, her throat tight. "And if I say no?" "Then I'll give you enough money to get far from here," he said. "East, if that's what you want. South, maybe. You decide. You owe me nothing." That word, nothing, hit her harder than any blow. She had spent her whole life owing someone, her father's debts, her family's shame, the world's laughter. Yet this man offered her freedom without condition, without even asking for gratitude. Her lip trembled. "Why me?" Gabe looked at her then, really looked. "Because no one else would," he said, "and because once someone should have done the same for another woman and didn't." He turned then, as though the words had cost him something. "Come on. There's still a few hours before dawn. We'll ride before the snow turns heavy." She hesitated, glancing back toward the saloon where her father still sat, slumped, drunk, already forgetting her name. The sight was enough. Without another word, she followed the mountain man into the storm. They rode in silence, save for the rhythmic crunch of hooves through snow. The trail wound higher and higher, each breath colder than the last. Gabe rode ahead, his shoulders broad beneath his fur coat, his movements calm, deliberate. He never once looked back to make sure she followed. He didn't have to. She trusted him in a way she couldn't explain. Hours passed before he slowed. "We'll stop here," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to a pine. "You need to rest." "I'm fine," she insisted, though her lips were blue, her hands trembling. "You're freezing," he said, and without another word shrugged off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled like pine, leather, and smoke, a scent so steady, so safe, it nearly undid her. Cora blinked up at him. "You'll freeze." "I've lived through worse," Gabe said. "And you haven't." For the first time, a faint smile curved his lips. It wasn't a smile of charm. It was small, real, fragile, like a sunrise after a long night. She felt something shift inside her then, something warm, flickering in a place that had been cold for years. When dawn finally broke, painting the snow pink and gold, Cora realized she had crossed more than just distance. She had crossed a threshold she could never uncross, leaving behind a world that saw her as weight and following a man who saw her as worth. As they reached the ridge, Gabe pointed ahead. "Down there," he said. "That's home." Cora looked. Below them, tucked against the mountainside, was a cabin made of dark timber and stone. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney. A frozen creek glimmered nearby. Everything about it, the sturdy porch, the little shed, the trail of footprints, spoke of solitude and survival. "You live here alone?" she asked softly. "Mostly," Gabe said, "but it's not as empty as it looks." Something in his tone, the quiet ache beneath the words, made her wonder what ghosts still walked these woods beside him. She didn't ask, not yet. All she said was, "It's beautiful." He nodded once. "It's honest," he replied. "That's all I ever needed." And for the first time in her life, Cora thought maybe, just maybe, it could be all she needed too. The snow thickened as they climbed higher into the wilderness, blanketing the earth in a silence so deep that even their horses' breathing felt loud. The world below, the tavern, the debt, the laughter, was already fading, swallowed by white. Only the steady rhythm of hooves and the whisper of falling flakes filled the air. Cora's fingers had gone numb hours ago. Her body ached, and the cold bit through even the thick fur coat Gabe had given her. She hadn't realized the mountains could feel so endless. Yet every time she faltered, every time her horse stumbled, Gabe slowed just enough for her to catch up. He never scolded, never spoke harshly, just looked back once, eyes meeting hers for a heartbeat, silently saying, "You're doing fine." When the wind picked up, he guided them off the main trail and toward a cluster of tall firs. "We'll rest here," he said, his voice low but carrying easily through the storm. He dismounted, his movements smooth and practiced. "The horses need a break? You do too." Cora tried to protest. "You can freeze if you keep going," he interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "Off the horse, Cora." She obeyed. The ground was slick beneath her boots, and she nearly slipped. Gabe's hand caught her elbow before she fell. His touch was warm through her sleeve, steady, unshaking. For a moment, she forgot the cold altogether. He set up a small camp beneath the trees, working efficiently. A fire sparked to life in moments, orange light flickering across his face. He pulled a small iron pot from his pack and began to melt snow inside it. The smell of pine and smoke mingled in the air. Cora crouched near the fire, rubbing her hands together. "You've done this before," she said softly. "Every winter for 20 years," he replied. "You learn if you want to live." His tone carried no pride, just truth. They sat in silence for a while, the flames crackling between them. Cora watched him stir the pot, adding dried meat, a handful of herbs, and something that smelled faintly of garlic. Her stomach tightened with hunger she hadn't felt in days. When he finally handed her a tin bowl, she hesitated. "You should eat first." "I already did," he said, though she noticed his bowl stayed empty. Cora took a small spoonful. The soup was simple, but it filled her chest with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. She swallowed hard, blinking back sudden tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Gabe nodded, looking into the flames. "You don't owe me gratitude either." "Then what do I owe you?" she asked. He turned to her, eyes catching the firelight, dark, thoughtful, almost haunted. "Nothing," he said again, "except, maybe, to stay alive." Cora didn't know how to answer that, so she simply ate in silence, the soft crackle of fire filling the space between them. When she finished, Gabe handed her a blanket from his pack. "You should rest," he said. "What about you?" "I'll keep watch." Cora hesitated. The forest beyond the fire's edge was black and full of whispers. "You don't sleep?" "Not much," he said, a small wry smile touching his lips. "Too many dreams." The way he said it made her chest tighten. She wanted to ask what kind of dreams, but the words died on her tongue. She curled up near the fire, clutching the blanket tight. For the first time in years, she drifted into sleep without fear. When she woke, the fire had burned low and dawn had painted the sky pale gold. Gabe was standing by the horses, adjusting a saddle strap, the light outlining his broad frame. He glanced back when he heard her stir. "Morning," he said quietly. "There's coffee." Cora rubbed her eyes and sat up. "You made coffee? Out here?" He shrugged. "Some things are worth carrying." She smiled despite herself. It was the first smile she'd worn in what felt like years. They packed the camp and continued upward. The path grew steeper, the air thinner. Gabe led the way, sometimes breaking the ice with his boots so her horse wouldn't stumble. Every now and then he'd point out small things, tracks in the snow, a hawk circling far above, a frozen stream glinting like glass. "You see that ridge?" he said at one point. "Once we cross it, we're close." "How close?" she asked, breathless. "Half a day if the weather holds." He glanced up at the clouds. It might not. He was right. By mid-afternoon, the storm returned, thick and blinding. The wind howled through the trees like a living thing. Snow swirled in wild sheets, erasing the world beyond a few feet. Gabe called over the noise, "Stay close!" But even as fear clawed at her, she noticed the way he shielded her from the worst of the wind, positioning himself between her and the storm. When her horse stumbled again, he was there instantly, steadying both animal and rider with his strength. At last, through the curtain of snow, she saw it, a faint curl of smoke rising above a line of trees. "There," he said, voice almost lost in the wind. "That's home." By the time they reached the cabin, dusk had fallen. Gabe helped her down from the horse and guided her inside. The warmth hit her like a blessing. A crackling fire, stacks of wood neatly piled, the faint smell of pine and cedar. He handed her a towel. "Sit by the fire. I'll take care of the horses." When he returned, she was wrapped in a blanket, steam curling from her hair. Gabe stood by the door, snow melting off his coat. "This place?" she murmured. "It feels safe." He nodded once. "It's meant to." Their eyes met, and for a long, wordless moment, neither looked away. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside there was warmth, the kind that doesn't come from fire alone. The first morning in the cabin dawned blue and silent. Snow covered the windowsills in soft drifts, muffling every sound from outside. For a moment, Cora forgot where she was. She only felt the warmth of the blanket, the smell of wood smoke, and the faint crackle of the hearth. Then she heard footsteps, slow and heavy, and remembered Gabe. He was at the stove, his broad back turned toward her, pouring something dark into 2 tin mugs. "You sleep well?" he asked without turning around. She blinked, surprised that he'd noticed. I think so." "Good. The coffee's strong enough to wake the dead," he said, handing her a mug. "And don't worry, the mountain doesn't bite as hard in daylight." She smiled faintly, taking the mug with both hands. It was hot, bitter, and perfect. "Thank you." "You can stop thanking me," he said, settling into the chair opposite her. "You're not a guest here, Cora. You live here now, least until you decide otherwise." The words lingered in the air, heavier than smoke. You live here now. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear that. The idea that she belonged somewhere, even temporarily. The cabin was small, but full of quiet order, shelves stacked with jars of preserved fruit, bundles of herbs drying from the rafters, a rifle resting neatly by the door. A handmade quilt covered the bed she'd slept in, each patch a different shade of earth and sky. She wondered if someone else had sewn it, the woman from the photograph, perhaps, but she didn't ask. Instead, she said softly, "You keep it clean." Gabe looked around, as though seeing his home through her eyes for the first time. "I suppose I do. Habit." When you live alone long enough, every small thing becomes something to hold on to. Cora traced her finger along the mug's rim. And now, you're not alone. He glanced at her, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. No, he said quietly, I'm not. Days passed, measured by the rhythm of firewood, snow, and silence. Gabe hunted, Cora cooked and tended the house. At first, she was clumsy in her new world, burning her fingers on the stove, spilling flour, tripping over the dog that seemed to appear from nowhere one morning. But every mistake was met not with scolding, only quiet amusement. One afternoon, as she tried to carry an armful of logs, the door creaked open and Gabe appeared. Without a word, he took half the load from her arms. You don't have to, she began. I know, he interrupted, but I want to. Cora looked up at him, at the snow melting in his beard, at the kindness that seemed to live in his silence. Why are you always so gentle? He paused, then shrugged. Because too many men forget what it costs not to be. That night, after dinner, he brought out an old guitar. His fingers were rough, but the sound was soft, like wind over the river. Cora sat by the fire, listening. When he finished, she clapped quietly. I didn't know you played. I don't, he said with a small smile. I just remember the song she used to hum. She knew who she was. The woman in the picture, Helena, the ghost that still lingered between them. Cora hesitated, then said gently, She must have loved you very much. He looked into the fire. Not enough to live forever, but enough to stay. The logs popped, sending sparks upward. She wanted to reach for his hand, but didn't. Instead, she whispered, You shouldn't have to be alone with the ghosts. He looked up, met her eyes, and said quietly, Maybe I don't have to be. The days grew longer. Snow turned to rain, and rain to thaw. Spring crept slowly through the valley, dripping from the eaves and bringing green to the forest. Cora found herself humming while she worked. She planted seeds in a small patch of soil outside the cabin, her hands dirty and her heart light. Gabe had built a fence around it the night before without her asking. Bears like beans, he'd said. Can't have them stealing your crop. Sometimes he watched her from the porch, arms crossed, pretending to check the sky. Other times, she caught him smiling when he thought she wasn't looking. In the evenings, they shared stories. She told him about her childhood, the years of being laughed at for her size, the ache of trying to make herself smaller to be loved. He told her about the mountains, about storms that could strip the skin from trees, about wolves that hunted in pairs, about the beauty of surviving where most couldn't. You ever regret coming up here? She asked one night. He thought for a long time before answering. No, he said finally. I only regret not finding peace sooner. Maybe peace isn't found, she said softly. Maybe it's built. He turned his head then, studying her face in the firelight. You're building it here, he said. She smiled, and for a moment, neither spoke. The fire hissed. The world outside was silent, and she felt something in her chest settle, something that had been restless all her life. That night, a storm came. Thunder rolled across the mountains like a growl, and rain lashed against the cabin. The wind howled through the chimney. Cora woke with a start, heart racing. She rose and padded quietly into the main room. Gabe was already there, sitting by the fire, boots still on, rifle across his knees. Couldn't sleep, he said, glancing at her. "Me neither," she replied, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "The thunder, it sounds alive." "It is," he said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "The mountains like to remind us they're still here." She moved closer to the fire, her face lit by the flames. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The air between them was full of the storm's hum, and something else, softer but stronger. When lightning flashed through the window, she flinched. Gabe's hand reached out, instinctive, steady, landing on hers. His touch grounded her like stone. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't move his hand. "You're safe here," he said simply. She looked up. "Am I?" "Yes," he said, his voice like a vow. "You always will be." Their eyes met and held. Outside, thunder roared. Inside, something deeper began to bloom, fragile, stubborn, unstoppable. For the first time since she could remember, Cora believed him. Spring melted into summer, and with it, a rhythm settled into the cabin, the kind of quiet balance that felt too perfect to last. Gabe hunted and built. Cora cooked, planted, and sang softly while she worked. There were mornings when sunlight filtered through the wooden slats, and she would wake to find coffee already waiting for her, steam curling gently in the golden light. There were nights when they would sit by the fire not speaking because they didn't need to. But peace, she learned, was a fragile thing in the mountains. It started with a knock, harsh, insistent, one afternoon while Gabe was out chopping wood. Cora froze, her heart climbing into her throat. No one ever came this far up the ridge, no one but him. The door creaked open before she could move. A man stood there, tall, wiry, with a sheriff's badge pinned crookedly to his chest. His coat was dusted with road grit, and his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon, ma'am," he drawled, tipping his hat. "Name's Sheriff Klein. I'm looking for a man lives up this way, calls himself Gabriel Ironwood." Cora swallowed. "He's outside," she said, voice unsteady. "Chopping wood." Klein stepped inside without invitation, letting his boots track mud across the floorboards. His gaze wandered, slow and assessing, until it landed on her. "You the woman from town? The one that fella bought from her own daddy?" The words hit like a slap. "He didn't buy me," she said sharply. "He freed me." The sheriff chuckled. "Sure he did." He leaned against the doorframe. "Word is, Ironwood's been hiding things. Land he shouldn't own, money that ain't his, and maybe a few bodies buried in this mountain. You sure you know the man you're living with?" Before she could answer, a shadow filled the doorway behind him. Gabe stood there, axe in hand, his expression unreadable. The sheriff straightened immediately, hand twitching near his revolver. "Step outside, Klein," Gabe said quietly. "Just doing my duty, Ironwood," the sheriff replied, forcing a grin. "Got a few questions need answering." "Then ask them somewhere else," Gabe said. His tone was calm, but the air in the room changed. Heavier, colder. "This is my home." The sheriff hesitated, then smirked. "You got a temper, old man. Folks in town said as much. Said it's what got your wife and kid killed." Cora gasped softly. Gabe didn't move, didn't blink. But something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Get out," he said, each word sharp enough to cut. For a long, tense moment, the only sound was the wind through the trees. Then the sheriff shrugged. "Suit yourself. I'll be back, though. And maybe next time I'll bring men who ain't so polite." He tipped his hat to Cora, eyes glinting. "Ma'am." When the door closed behind him, silence flooded the cabin again. Cora's hands trembled around the edge of the table. Gabe set the axe down slowly, then leaned against the wall, his shoulders tight. "Gabe," she began, hesitant. What did he mean? He didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, jaw clenched, until finally he said, "Half of what he said's lies. The other half is old truth." Cora stepped closer. "Tell me." He looked up at her, the man who had saved her, who had given her warmth and safety, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes, not of her, of what she might think. "When Helena and Samuel died," he said slowly, "I didn't handle it right. I went into town, half mad with grief. The doctor who refused to come, I went after him, broke his arm, put another man through a window. The sheriff then, Klein's father, told me I was lucky he didn't hang me. I left town that day and never went back. They've called me dangerous ever since." Cora reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You were angry because you loved them." "I was angry because I failed them," Gabe said, voice low, "and I've been paying for it every day since." She shook her head. "You didn't fail. The town failed you." He met her eyes. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "That man, Klein, he'll come back. He wants land, money, and control. He'll use you to get to me." "I'm not afraid of him," Cora said. "You should be," Gabe replied. "He's the kind who hides a snake under his smile." Over the next few days, tension hung thick in the air. Gabe reinforced the cabin shutters and oiled his rifle. Cora pretended not to notice, but at night she saw him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames until dawn. One evening, as thunder rolled through the valley, she couldn't stand the silence any more. "You can't keep blaming yourself forever," she said softly. "The past doesn't own you." He turned toward her, eyes shadowed. "Maybe not, but it still defines me." "Then let it make you better," she said, "not bitter." Something broke in him at that, something quiet, unseen. He exhaled, long and heavy. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," she said, "but neither is living, and you've done that alone long enough." He smiled faintly, not quite happy, but grateful. "You're braver than you think, Cora." "So are you," she said. Outside, lightning lit up the windows. The storm was coming closer. She could feel it in the wind and in her chest. Cora moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "If he comes back," she said, "we'll face him together." Gabe looked down at her, at the woman he had rescued, who had somehow rescued him in return. "Together," he said, and the word felt like a promise. But the mountains keep their promises in blood. 2 days later, while Gabe was out hunting, Cora heard the horses panic. She ran to the window and froze. The sheriff had returned, not alone this time, but with 3 armed men. They dismounted, spreading out around the cabin like wolves circling prey. Klein shouted, "Ironwood, we know you're in there. Come out, or we'll burn this place down." Cora's heart hammered. She grabbed Gabe's rifle from its place by the door and aimed it through the window, hands shaking. "He's not here," she shouted. "Leave now." The sheriff laughed. "That's so? Then maybe we'll just take what's left of his pretty little debt payment instead." The door rattled under a hard kick. Cora's finger trembled on the trigger. "Don't," she said, voice breaking. "Don't come any closer." "Or what?" Klein sneered. "You'll shoot me?" "I will," she said, and she meant it. Then from the trees came a deep, furious voice. "Step away from that door." The men froze. Gabe emerged from the shadows like part of the mountain itself, coat dark with rain, eyes burning. He moved fast, faster than any of them expected. The first man raised his gun, but Gabe's rifle cracked once, dropping him to the ground. The others scattered, shouting, "Klein!" Gabe roared. "This ends now!" The sheriff fired, the shot missing wide. Gabe's next bullet shattered the pistol from his hand, sending it spinning into the mud. In the silence that followed, even the wind held its breath. Gabe walked up slowly, towering over him. "You ever come near her again," he said, voice low and steady, "I'll bury you where the trees don't remember your name." The sheriff, bleeding from his knuckles, scrambled to his feet. "You're finished, Ironwood. I'll tell the judge." "Tell whoever you want," Gabe said, "but you won't come back here." Klein hesitated, then turned and fled, his men following. When the sound of hooves faded, Cora stepped out, breath shaking. "Gabe," she whispered, "you could have killed him." "I almost did," he said, chest heaving. Then softer, "But I remembered what you said about being better." She reached for his hand, gripping it tight. "You already are." He looked at her then, and something inside both of them shifted. The storm was over, but the air between them still crackled, not with fear, but with something fiercer, deeper, undeniable. 2 weeks passed. The air turned sharp again, carrying the edge of autumn down from the peaks. Cora had begun to believe it was over, that the sheriff had limped away to nurse his pride and leave them in peace. Gabe said little about it, but she saw how he moved differently now, how his eyes lingered on the tree line when he split wood, how his rifle never left arm's reach. Peace in the mountains never lasted long. That evening, the sky bled red behind the ridge as they sat down to dinner. Cora had baked bread, the scent of it softening the air, when the horses began to scream. Gabe was on his feet before the chair hit the floor. He grabbed his rifle, motioning for her to stay back. "Don't move," he said, voice low and tight. "If anything happens, you get to the root cellar." But Cora followed him anyway, the fear in her chest heavier than obedience. When he opened the door, she saw torches flickering through the trees. 5 riders this time, shadows moving like firelight over their guns. Klein's voice rang out, rough and triumphant. "Gabe Ironwood, you think you can threaten me and walk free? I brought the law with me this time." "The law?" Gabe called back. "You brought thieves with badges." Laughter answered him. "Doesn't matter what you call us. You're done. That land, that woman, everything you got, it's all coming with me." Beside him, Cora's hands clenched around the doorway. She'd never seen Gabe like this, steady, calm, eyes cold as the barrel of his rifle. He whispered, "Stay inside," but she shook her head. "No," she said, "not this time." Klein's men dismounted, spreading out through the snow. The torches burned brighter, shadows leaping over the walls of the cabin. "Come out," one shouted, "or we'll burn you out." Gabe stepped onto the porch, rifle ready. "You start a fire on this mountain," he said evenly, "and you'll die here." The first gunshot cracked the night wide open. Wood splintered near Gabe's shoulder. He dropped to one knee, fired once, and one of Klein's men fell without a sound. The others ducked behind the horses, shooting blindly. Inside, Cora's heart hammered. Smoke from the torches was curling near the windows. She saw the way Gabe's silhouette jerked with each shot, saw him reloading, too exposed. Without thinking, she grabbed the spare rifle from above the hearth and ran outside. "Cora!" he shouted when he saw her. Get back!" But she didn't. She took aim, hands trembling, breath tight, and fired. The shot whined into the trees, scattering one of the men who'd been creeping toward Gabe's flank. She didn't hit him, but it was enough to break their advance. "Damn it," Gabe muttered, but there was pride in his voice. Klein's voice rose again. "She's got nerve, I'll give her that. But tell me, Ironwood, how many women you plan to bury on this mountain?" The words struck like poison. Gabe's jaw tightened, rage flashing in his eyes. But before he could answer, Cora shouted back, her voice fierce and steady. "He's buried enough because of men like you." For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then Klein snarled, "You'll die with him, then!" He raised his gun, but Gabe was faster. One clean shot echoed through the trees. The sheriff's torch dropped, hissed in the snow, and went out. Silence fell. The other men looked at their fallen leader, then at the man who'd killed him without a flicker of hesitation. One by one, they turned and fled into the woods, their torches fading into darkness. Gabe lowered the rifle slowly. The sound of the wind returned, hollow and endless. He turned toward Cora. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, chest rising and falling. "No, but you—" "I'm fine," he said, though his hand was bleeding from a splintered bullet graze. Without thinking, she caught his hand, pressed her sleeve against it. The heat of his skin, the roughness of his palm, it made her tremble more than the battle had. "You saved me again," she whispered. He met her gaze, breath unsteady. "No, Cora, we saved each other." Hours later, the torches were ashes and the snow was falling again, slow and clean. They stood on the porch, watching flakes gather where blood had soaked into the ground. Gabe's arm slipped around her shoulders. "It's over now," he said. She leaned against him. "You don't have to be alone anymore." He looked down at her, the firelight catching in his eyes. "I'm not." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled softly, and for the first time in years, Gabe Ironwood allowed himself to believe in tomorrow. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world hushed and white. The valley below glittered like glass under the rising sun. Smoke curled from the cabin chimney, straight and calm, no longer a signal of danger, but of life continuing. Cora stood on the porch, wrapped in one of Gabe's old coats, watching the snow melt in slow rivulets down the roof. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful. She could still smell the gunpowder, still see the ghost of firelight in her mind, but beneath it all was something softer. Safety, belonging. Gabe stepped outside, his arm bandaged, his movement slower than usual. He stood beside her without a word, the boards creaking under his boots. "Does it ever stop?" she asked quietly. "The fear that something else will come?" He shook his head. "No, but it gets smaller when you got someone to stand beside you." She looked up at him, and he smiled. A real one this time, tired but warm. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in a piece of leather. When he opened it, a small silver ring gleamed in his palm. Simple, but beautifully made. "I started forging this years ago," he said. "Never thought I'd finish it. Guess I was waiting for the right reason." Cora's breath caught. "Gabe." He turned to face her fully, snow dusting his shoulders like frost. "You came here a stranger. You stayed when you could have run. You made this place feel like more than a memory. And I—" He exhaled, voice low and certain. "I can't imagine the mountains without you anymore." Tears blurred her vision, but she smiled through them. You don't have to. He took her hand, rough against soft, and slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as though it had been meant for her all along. She laughed softly, trembling. It's cold. So am I, he said, his smile deepening. We'll warm each other. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. The world fell away. The snow, the scars, the past. There was only the sound of his heartbeat, steady and strong, and the knowledge that somehow, against every cruelty, they had found something whole. When they finally pulled apart, Cora looked toward the forest, where the light broke through the pines in golden shards. "Do you think they'll come back?" she asked. "Maybe," he said, "but if they do, they'll find more than just one mountain man waiting." She smiled. "They'll find us." Gabe nodded, his arms sliding around her shoulders. "Home," he murmured. "That's what this is now." Cora rested her head against him. It always was. Inside, the fire burned low, its glow spilling through the window, a promise against the cold. Outside, the mountains stood tall, silent witnesses to their beginning, and somewhere in the wind, between the trees, the world itself seemed to whisper, "You're safe here." Every story like this reminds us that love isn't found in comfort. It's forged in fire, in the hands of those who choose compassion when the world demands cruelty. Gabe and Cora began in debt and shame, yet they ended in freedom and grace, not because fate was kind, but because they were brave enough to love anyway. Maybe you felt like Cora once, unwanted, underestimated, or sold short by life itself. If so, remember, you are not the debt someone else owes. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe love can rewrite destiny, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you.